to make, we did have one submission for public comment, and I'm just going to read that out loud. Second. Okay. I would like to ask the Advisory Board on Teacher Education and Licensure to officially recognize highly qualified, rigorously trained English as a second language teachers. Many of us have bachelor's degrees in foreign language and master's degrees in teaching English to speakers of other languages. We have studied linguistics as a part of our programs, and many of us speak multiple languages. Some of us have worked in embassies in impoverished and war-torn countries. We've given English lessons to women who are victims of acid attacks and those who have escaped genocide. We're a diverse, highly qualified, culturally aware group of professionals who make it possible for immigrants and refugees to successfully integrate into Virginia's communities. Due to the need for ESL, LIEP teachers, and the lack of well-trained educators in this field, the bar to obtain an ESL endorsement has lowered. At first, the bar was lowered to 12 hours of training, but currently no coursework or experience is required to obtain an endorsement. Districts are offering free workshops in order to help colleagues pass the praxis, while many of us continue to pay our student loans needed to obtain these qualifications. We have a heart for these children and have spent years gaining cultural knowledge and academic experience, but as far as to the bar to obtain an endorsement continues to lower, so does our morale. Please consider formally recognizing our contributions and highly qualified status. And this came from Sheila King from Newport News Public Schools. Okay, we will now move on to our agenda items. And first we have a presentation from Pearson. So we would like to welcome Kelly Crawford, Associate Vice President of State Partnerships, and Jerry DeLuca, Director of Business Development and Evaluation Systems, Group of Pearson.
I guess I'll give a little context since I come. Again, thank our colleagues from Pearson for coming today. A little context, as you saw in your agenda item, it was a summary of all of the current required assessments for all teachers. I will advise this group reviewed and received a presentation from Pearson last year. As we know, they have recommended that the VCLA be regenerated. It's been over 5-7 years, if I remember correctly, and they have recommended that the VCLA be regenerated and that the state would lead that initiative as a customized assessment. This group, following some research, took this opportunity to explore assessments in general. We know that there have been quite a few discussions, requests around looking at our assessments, given especially some of our board's questions regarding the alignment or correlation between the assessments and teacher effectiveness. And so today, as well as next month, you will be receiving presentations from Pearson this week and ETS in March. So hopefully you'll engage with the presentation and we will take the information and run with it. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kelly Crawford and my colleague Jerry DeLuca. Oh, yes. Absolutely. And we hope you don't mind that we are going to kind of trade off today and both contribute to this conversation in this presentation. Please, at any time, don't hesitate to throw up your hand and interrupt us if you have any questions. We're also going to be sending and sharing a copy of this presentation with you, as there are several hyperlinks to resources and materials, so that if you want to dig in a little deeper to some of the constructs of the assessments and what's being measured in the assessments, you can certainly do that. Say anything before we get started?
So just a brief introduction. Myself, I'm Jerry DeLuca. I was your neighbor. I taught school for 25 years in the North Central Mountains of West Virginia. I know we have some middle school teachers in here, and so cut my teeth in middle school. If you can teach middle school, you can rule the world. So I appreciate you folks. But then did 16 years in high school teaching physics and chemistry. So the elephant in the room is, some of you may know me. I worked for 26 years at Educational Testing Service after I thought, as a second career kind of thing. And now I'm with Evaluation Systems in Pearson, and I'm very happy to be here. So Kelly is going to do the majority of the presentation, and I'm certainly here for questions. We'd like it to be conversational, so I would just emphasize what Kelly said. Stop us, interrupt us, and course correct us. If we don't get the information right, this is for you guys. So, if we're missing the point, let us know and we'll try to make it right for you. Okay, thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay.
So as Dr. Johnson mentioned, our colleague, Dr. Phil Gullion, was here with you last January and gave a little bit of an introduction and began discussing the redevelopment of ECLA, knowing that some of you may be newer to the board, or just to remind you of who we are. Evaluation Systems of Pearson really focuses on educator licensure assessment and support for those assessments. As you can see on this screen, it's really just showing you all of the states in which we have partnerships, but really to summarize that, we work very specifically on customized licensure assessments. So states who really want to build those assessments, from the ground up. We also work with a national program called the National Evaluation Series. We have a portfolio of assessments that are called shared assessments, and we're going to be actually sharing a little more information specifically around some of our literacy assessments today that fall into that category. And what that means is that one state has created that assessment. Their neighbor or other state may have said, hey, that's a pretty good assessment. We'd like to use it too. So it falls into a shared assessment portfolio that multiple states can use. And then lastly, we also work on several nationally available assessments. You may have heard of the EdTPA, which is a teacher performance assessment for pre-service teachers, as well as the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. So again, that's just a little bit of background on what evaluation systems, our scope of work. Today, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, we have been asked to bring to you some information around, first of all, measuring the science of reading knowledge for those teachers in your K-8, K-12, and 6-12 licensure areas. We also included some information today regarding alternative assessments for your English language learner teacher candidates. And also some information on not only the VCLA that you currently use, but other reading and writing assessments in our portfolio as well that you may want to consider as you move forward. So just a little, we'll start with the science of reading. And again, looking at some assessments that are designed and developed to measure skills and knowledge of those teachers in the 6-8, 6-12 and K-12 areas. I know you all have considered before an assessment called the Foundations of Reading. And I just want to mention that you were all given this morning a portfolio, or I'm sorry, a folder that just has a few collateral pieces in here. There is some information in here regarding Foundations of Reading. We're also going to share this with you electronically, but if you just wanted a little more information. We brought this before you again today because Foundations of Reading was designed and developed based on research for teachers in elementary, early childhood, special education, as well as middle childhood education. And understanding that's really the age group that you're looking for, we certainly wanted to put this in front of you again for consideration. So the Foundations of Reading assessment is one of those shared assessments. It was designed by the state of Massachusetts initially in the early 2000s, but was just redesigned and redeveloped 2 years ago in 2021. And so that redevelopment was driven, of course, with alignment to updated national standards, the standards through the International Literacy Association and the International Dyslexia Association. So really has the increased emphasis on, those evidence-based instructional strategies and really the application, giving them scenarios, giving them artifacts that would be collected in a classroom on their readers, and then asking them to respond, really to support and build up those comprehension skills as reading comprehension skills and the development of reading fluency. So again, lots more information on this assessment. If we can point you to those websites so you could see the objectives that are measured, and also there are sample questions provided, free study guides for teacher candidates as well. So a lot of information that we're happy to share with you. I wanted to let you know as well that with Foundations of Reading, I mentioned it is a shared assessment. And so just over the last 5 years, we have had 12 states, 11 in addition to Massachusetts, to adopt this assessment. And wanted to mention that because several of those states, so also in your folder, you have just a Word document that lists those 12 states that are currently using this assessment. And it also lists the endorsement areas for which they require it. So for instance, you can see with the state of Ohio and the state of Wisconsin, and again, we're going to send this to you electronically. Those are hyperlinked to the state site. So if you want to dig into that a little more, you certainly can. But you can see here with both of those states, Ohio and Wisconsin, this assessment is being used outside of elementary and pre-K and special ed, currently with their middle childhood endorsement areas as well. Okay. And lastly, just a reminder of what this test looks like. This is about a 4-hour. Candidates have up to 4 hours to take this assessment. It's comprised of both multiple choice as well as 2 open response item assignments. And as I mentioned, those constructed response items are really giving candidates artifacts, that you would collect through a classroom, show examples of their students' reading fluency, and then asking them to prepare a response and their strategies around further supporting that student. So this can be delivered both computer-based testing through testing centers, as well as online proctoring. So students can schedule time, and have that online proctoring, at a home in a secure environment. Okay. Any questions about that? Excuse me for just a minute. Yes.
Are the some areas have been broken down by, maybe they was said this and I've missed it, it's, like sub area 1 with content or?
Yes, so yes, they are, and they all have particular objectives, that fall under those sub areas. I'd be happy to pull it up, a graphic up for you here in just a second so you can see that. And also, yes, but we can, and it also lists the number of questions that fall into each of those sub areas. Okay. So again, Foundations of Reading is that assessment to measure teacher candidates, teachers' knowledge of science of reading. One other thing that the state of Virginia and you as their advisory board may want to consider is something we're seeing in several other states, most recently here in the state of Illinois, in which they also have a literacy act that is requiring training for teachers, from K through 12 in science of reading. And so what the state of Illinois has decided to do is, rather than adding or adopting an additional literacy assessment for their teachers, through their redevelopment cycle of their content tests, they are redeveloping and adding a strand of literacy competencies into those content assessments. So for instance, and again, we can provide you with these if you'd like to look at a few, having my colleague here as a chemistry person and myself a middle school science person. We pulled the example of a chemistry assessment, but this is their secondary, obviously secondary science chemistry assessment. And I've highlighted here that in one of the sub areas of that assessment, they have now added those literacy competencies. Now they're in the process, excuse me, they're in the process of doing this. They're rolling them out, a few tests every year. So not all of the tests have yet gone through this redevelopment, but all of the secondary science, physical education have been launched. But really, again, just wanted to bring this to you. I know this is a lot of text on the page and you can't hone in and read all of that, but just wanted to highlight these objectives. So overall, the objective at the top, understand the process of reading and apply knowledge of strategies for promoting students' reading development in the science classroom. So then you have specific examples like demonstrating knowledge of the reading process, engaging the reader's prior knowledge, information in the text and purpose of the reading situation. The second example here is demonstrating knowledge of the role of vocabulary knowledge and supporting students' reading comprehension and concept develop and apply knowledge of strategies for promoting students' discipline-specific vocabulary development. Applying knowledge of strategies for preparing students to read text effectively and teaching and modeling the use of comprehension strategies, and applying knowledge of strategies for developing students' skills to comprehend and critically analyze discipline-specific texts. So again, and there are a few more. I don't want to continue reading to you, but again, objectives that are going to be woven into this assessment rather than having that separate literacy assessment. And here is just an example of one of those questions in the science classroom. They're giving the teacher candidate a scenario. Students in a chemistry class will be reading a text that focuses on the complex process of reaction mechanisms and transition states. The teacher wants to teach students how to use visualization as a comprehension strategy to improve their understanding of the text. The teacher begins by explaining the visualization is used to create a mental picture of the object, concept, or process described, and then asking them what is the best, or which of the following steps should the teacher take to use this comprehension strategy. I'll give you just a moment to look at that there, with the correct response being at the bottom. So again, just wanted to reiterate here that we've worked with Illinois to make this appropriate for Illinois, right, and to customize it for their needs based on their legislative requirements, their licensure policies and requirements, and they have decided to combine this, right, and weave it into their assessments rather than requiring an additional assessment from their secondary teachers.
I think as a chemistry teacher, and I look at this, okay, I think it's a powerful statement to embed reading literacy skills within the content test. It sends a message across the curriculum how important that is. So that's as a hardcore content guy in science, I found that pretty refreshing.
Another thing for you to consider as you're thinking about assessing science of reading knowledge, these may or may not hit the target that you have for your teachers, but we also just wanted you to be aware that we customize with states many different reading teacher or reading specialist tests. Some of these, of course, require training in the classroom up to a master's degree, as a reading specialist. So I've just highlighted here for you and provided a link to review if you would like one of the most recently redeveloped assessments, and that's the reading specialist assessment out of Massachusetts. But if you would like to look at any of these others, then again, we'd be happy to share that information with you. Okay. So then we can move into one other question or information that Dr. Johnson requested we bring today. just to talk maybe a little about how we see states looking at their assessments and considering what they can do, what alternative arrangements or supports that they can have in place to support those teacher candidates who themselves are English language learners. And so just wanted to share with you a few things that we see other states currently providing their candidates. So first of all, one thing we can certainly consider, and as we move into the potential development of VCLA, these are things that you could consider to add to that assessment as well. But things like alternative arrangements. So this is something that a teacher candidate, ahead of testing can request that they are provided these alternative arrangements. And those can include things like a separate testing area, within a testing center, if that is a Pearson VUE testing center, things like extended time for their test taking, and then also giving them the opportunity to use bilingual dictionaries or glossaries while they are taking those tests. So those are all things. I did look at the current alternative arrangements for VCLA, and this is not a part of the current structure. So that may be something that, you would want to reconsider and as we move forward with that assessment. Okay.
How far in advance do students have to make a request like that? Because I know I've had students who had accommodations because of a learning disability or something where they got extended time. What is the process for requesting?
Yeah, so it differs a little bit test by test. I can certainly look it up. I know with EdTPA is where I've worked the last several years, and it was 2 weeks in advance. But I'd be happy to double check that because they are going into a testing center to take this. It may be a little bit more leeway, but let me certainly double check and we'll find that out for you.
In general, I think when people go and they apply for accommodations, I think the key is to do it early and to include complete documentation. And, when they apply, usually that's, if something holds it up, it's somebody hasn't included timely or current or the documentation if necessary.
One other thing that we wanted to share with you today is something that we are doing with our partners in Minnesota. Minnesota is certainly seeing, a growth in teachers that are English language learners themselves within their redevelopment of their content tests, and those are on a schedule of so many assessments are redeveloped every year, that they have asked that these assessments now be available and are delivered in multiple languages. Now, Minnesota is unique with their populations, and so they have asked us specifically to translate those assessments into Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. But of course, that is something that, based on Virginia's needs, those are things that you could consider. And again, it's no additional cost, to your teacher candidates. It rolls into the redevelopment of those assessments. Again, this is something that if you would like to look at those titles, I believe right now the elementary and their 4 core secondary have been redeveloped, and they're also now redeveloping some of their lower volume, physical education, their K-12 assessment areas as well. Okay. So we'll move in then to some of the reading and writing proficiency assessments. I was telling Dr. Johnson this morning, I appreciated the opportunity to myself kind of research and better understand VCLA, the current assessment that you're using, how it was developed and kind of what it might have been, modeled after. This was developed, kicked off back in 2005 with some legislation in the state here in Virginia, and the test was developed in 2007. So now being in 2022, right? That is why we are here to again talk with you about potential redevelopment of that assessment. This, just a reminder, this is a computer-based and online proctored test. Has both a reading and a writing subtest, and you can see there that both of those assessments, both of the subtests have approximately 40 multiple choice items, and then the writing subtest also has 3 short answer items, 1 written summary assignment, and 1 written composition assignment. So as I was researching the development of VCLA, of course, the state looked at multiple assessments that were out there, but they kept going back to a test that Massachusetts had available at the time. And it was called the Communication and Literacy Skills Options Test. And so the VCLA was modeled after this assessment. As I was researching this and asking my counterpart who works on the Massachusetts program, she said, well, Massachusetts is actually right in the same spot that Virginia is right now. They are the timing is that this test is scheduled for redevelopment in 2024. But before they went further with that redevelopment, they said, hey, let's look at a couple other things that other states are doing to inform our own redevelopment. So if you go to the Massachusetts website right now, you'll see that their candidates have not only that communication and literacy skills test that they can take, but they are also piloting assessments from multiple other states. So again, we provide these links to you if you would like to look into any of these assessments. I think one other thing that Jerry and I have talked about is that if you all would want to see, in a comparison or an alignment between what VCLA is currently measuring and any of these other assessments, that's certainly something that we could provide you as well.
Yes.
So you can really, So some of the assessments here, again, just to let you know what's available out there, is this Massachusetts assessment. And I've included the delivery and format information. You'll see that they're all very similar, right? They're all include multiple choice and then also some constructed or open response items. We also have out of Indiana, the core academic skills assessment. So again, this is being piloted in Massachusetts right now as well. They're going to be looking at their data. They're going to be looking at, of course, performance data across demographic groups, and other background questions that candidates respond to as they're registering to really look at the impact. Absolutely.
So when you pilot that, what does that mean? Does that mean that people can take it and it still counts for licensure, even though they've got a variety of tests they can pick from?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can really do it, you can pilot it at your desire. You could pilot it in a fashion that's no fault. In other words, just have people take it and it's not consequential to their licensure, or you can have it be consequential to the licensure certificate. So it's really what the state wants to do and how they want to do it. We'll work on the solution that works best for you guys.
Are there fees associated with the pilot?
Well, so in this case, in Massachusetts, candidates are paying for the assessment just as they would the Massachusetts assessment. But the pricing is pretty similar across the programs. Yeah. I will point out to you a few of these because they are state specific. This one, particularly Indiana, you see here, it's computer-based testing, which means any of the testing centers and online proctoring. But some of the assessments, we have the NES, again, which is a national assessment. So that would be available computer-based test. But then we have something like the Missouri educator assessment. And so you'll notice here that this is IBT based, which means that this is an assessment that can be pushed out to local school district EPP testing centers, right? So they would not necessarily, and please chime in here, but they would not necessarily have to go through a Pearson VUE. They could do the online proctoring, or it could be locally, housed and administered. So again, that's something that we could think about with VCLA.
And think of online proctoring as at home.
Yeah. We also have tests out of the state of Washington. The West B has both a reading and writing component. I also just want to mention this in case you do decide to dig around a little and look at some of these websites. Many of these assessments have a third component or a third subtest of mathematics. But we've just included the reading and writing here for you because again, that's what we were asked to bring, but just didn't want you to be surprised that when you go to these websites that you may also see the mathematics component there. And then lastly, we have the California assessment, the CBEST reading and writing. Now, this one is not currently being piloted in Massachusetts, but we do have a few other states that are currently looking at this assessment. So again, wanted to bring it before you today, just so that you are aware of it. And that's, again, one that we could do an alignment or crosswalk with if you'd like to see that in the future.
I know the format of each one of these tests is very different, from the number of multiple choice to the way the writing is actually assessed. Is there like a research base, kind of like this is more of the norm, or is it, how's that being derived? Because I'm seeing things from 35 to 50, 2 writing versus 1 writing.
Mm-hmm.
How is that composite created?
So if I can, there are nuances to every state and what every state wants to do. There's a certain research base behind what is good assessment, what isn't good assessment. There's always a tension between the cost of an assessment, the time it takes to take that assessment. And so really what it boils down to is what the state values, what they're looking for. You know, some of that is face validity. You know, we need to have a constructive response, or we need 3. And what we would do is work with the state to make sure that the final design and form of the test meets all the necessary validity standards. And so we always want that test to be valid and reliable. And so we'll work within the state's needs to determine that. So, but basically, because a lot of these are custom developed tests, it comes down to what the state's looking for and all the tensions around testing in terms of what's possible and what works for them.
You'd be able to bring us like a recommendation to what Virginia says.
It's always your decision, but we would work with you to make sure that the recommendation always keeps you on good, solid, legal defensible ground. And it's a quality assessment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The selection tests that you presented here, do you know that these are all required licensure exams in each of these states for all teacher candidates, or do you think there's like variety within based on whether they're seeking certain endorsement areas or certain pathways? Do you know?
I don't want to say yes, certainly, because I'm not certain. But that's a real quick thing we could quickly research for you. Most of these, yes, kind of fall into that basic skills requirement. But as I mentioned, many of them also have the mathematics component, right, as well. So what in a state might use a Praxis core and even our NES core assessments, these would be, an alternative to that. So in most cases, they do require of all licensure areas, oftentimes even for entry into the preparation programs. But we can certainly double check for you and
a number
confirm
of the
that.
tests that you've seen up here fall in that category, but some do not. For example, depending on if it's a reading specialist test or not and what they want to use that particular test for. So there's a variety of, in some states, it's all educators have to take that. And other states, the particular test that's been developed is focused for another particular purpose. And it's not for certifying all candidates. So yeah, it just depends on what the state wants and needs.
Thank you for that question. So just kind of playing off of your question and really to bring us towards the end of this presentation, the last thing that we have in your folder, and I believe Dr. Johnson sent this, shared it with you electronically as well, is just kind of reviews. What does that test development process look like? Who's involved in that test development process? And I think as Jerry has said, that's really determined, by the state. Oftentimes states bring stakeholders, from around the state to inform these decisions, and participate in that stuff as the assessment development process. I think one thing I want to clarify, because I've learned this recently myself, is, my question was, well, when you're developing a new test, rather than taking something that's already in existence, to me, that would mean more cost. Potentially. And I've actually found that, not to be true, that there is not upfront costs to the state, that development costs are woven into the administrative, fees that your candidates would pay. But also with all of these assessments, when you go to the website, you can very clearly see what the costs of those are, ranging from $35 per a subtest, or I'm sorry, $25 for a subtest, and then some of them you sit for the entire assessment. So you can kind of see how those costs vary. But again, that's something that has to be a consideration in the development, right? What are reasonable costs for your teacher candidates, and ensuring that what is developed falls into that range. Anything else you'd like to say about development?
So the development, I think an important consideration of development, first of all, is what Kelly said. There's no cost to the state for custom development. So, and that is a misconception of many states. If I'm going to do a custom assessment, the state's going to have to pay for that upfront. That's not the case. All right. The second thing is, in terms of the development process, nobody's sitting in a corner making up gotcha questions. And so the more you know about the development process, the better. And it involves, in this case, it would involve Virginia educators. And so they are kept, they are involved every step of the way. And so there's development committees, there's bias review committees. Again, you get to drive that and you get to control that. And so we would work with you. One of the things that I'm excited about being in evaluation systems right now, it's if you will, they've always done this, but I think it's a refocus on meeting states where they are and looking at what states' needs are and working with those states. And so in that regard, the process always stays solid. We always maintain fidelity to that development process that always involves the educators, and they're the drivers of that. We just facilitate the process. So, and you could probably do an 2-hour-long session to the point you would want to pull your hair out if you had hair to pull out on just development. And so, and again, if you're interested in those things, we can certainly do more detailed workshops, information sessions if you want. Whatever you guys need. And so, and even this presentation, if we didn't talk about the things that you wanted to hear, let us know what you do want to hear. We'd be more than happy to
Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I guess it was last year in the Virginia Literacy Act, we have we're focusing on the 5 areas of reading.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other states that have created something like this? And let me go back to, I think what Eric was saying is that this may be our most important assessment, because all endorsements, everybody has to take BCLA. Now, I don't know about the most important, most telling, but anyhow, every single judgment. What I was thinking about is that since the 2 components that are on the BCLA right now measure writing ability, and then also there's the reading. Is there another state that we've already developed this test that kind of focuses on the 5 components of reading, fluency, comprehension? But anyhow, that maybe we could look at to put in that first component of the BCLA, and then keep writing the same. But then again, we will get into some deep discussions on this, but is there such a thing out there already?
So as I mentioned, many states have adopted that foundations of reading, which
The
is
first one
shared.
you shared.
Yeah, the
Let's
found,
Go back to that.
yeah, so I mean, it is one, that could certainly be, adopted overall. But what I think what I hear you saying though is could these competencies be woven into the redevelopment of ECLA? Right. Yeah. So in addition to foundations of reading, we do have several other states that have, yes, developed their own. Right off the top of my head, I'm thinking Texas has developed a similar, science of reading. They've invested a lot of money across the state to train, all of their teachers. So we can certainly share information with that. But I think the conversation though is in the redevelopment of ECLA. Yeah, how could we, like you said, maybe look at those objectives, look at the competencies that are being measured and customize and embed some of the science of reading content into that reading subtest. And yeah, as a customized assessment partner, then that's something certainly that we could consider.
Yeah, so I think if you go back to that slide with all the states. So, the five big pieces of that's been driven by this, the science of reading. You could take BCLA and you could do what you want with that. You could make the assessment you want. You could weave those components in there. All right. You could look at the foundations of reading and say, this is really, where we want to go. You do need to look at the developmental levels. A lot of people do think that's elementary only, so it's not, goes up, it's being used through middle school. And so, but this is, again, not an issue specific to Virginia. Across the country, everybody's wrestling with this. And that's why a lot of these states have turned to the foundation of reading, because of the big five in the science of reading.
So go back, didn't you have a slide that it talked about K-12 through middle school that were the upper grade levels? Is this assessment not relevant to those upper grade levels? I thought you had a slide that said.
Yeah, well, so this assessment, yes, it can be used, is currently being used in several states. For Ohio and Wisconsin have individual 5-9, right, where a candidate can come out and be, science and math 5-9, no elementary. And so for those endorsement areas, and then also some of their K-12 spanning and endorsement areas around special
They
education.
use this test.
They use this. Yes.
Okay, could you unpack any details about that assessment? Other than just showing where the states are, like the sections, that you unpack any of those details?
No, we can certainly, I can pull it up really quick on the website if you would like to see. Yeah.
We have a question, I think someone also.
Yes.
So.
No,
It's, it's the foundation of reading for teachers who are teaching children to read primarily, rather than the upper grades.
right. So, I mean, it was designed with research for early childhood, special education, elementary, and middle childhood.
And middle childhood is
5, 4, 9.
is that age or grade?
I'm sorry, grade levels. Yes, I'm sorry, grade levels. Yes. So, but it is not something that I'm aware of in any state that every single educator takes. It is currently, as I mentioned, being used in many states for all elementary, pre-K, special ed, K-12, which I know you are currently using a reading assessment for those groups. But in several states, it is also being expanded or has been expanded to include those middle childhood and K-12 areas. But it is not, I mean, in full transparency, it is not being used in any state currently for like 6-12 general science or,
So
yes.
it's, so, and this may be what I thought I could.
Mhm.
Is anybody got a good test already out there that all teachers, that tests all teachers on communications and literacy. And I heard you say Massachusetts had one,
Mhm.
they're piloting others, which I assume means they're, if you said they're in development process, so they don't have one right now that we could look to as a model. Is there anybody else that's got all teacher communication literacy assessment that's a model?
Yes, yes. So two different things here that we were presenting. The science of reading is that, or I'm sorry, yes, the foundations of reading is measuring that science of reading content was designed to assess teachers who have gone through either preparation in their preparation programs, or even some states that have invested in like letters training across the state, or then having their in-service teachers take that assessment as well. The last batch of assessments that we showed you, beginning with that Massachusetts and then following with Indiana and Missouri, all of those that we showed you, those are all taken, I think we're going to make sure, Dr. Malfa, but by all teacher candidates more as a basic skills assessment, right? Just like VCLA is. Often early on in their preparation, and sometimes even for admittance into preparation, right? So kind of two different things here. So it's not going to be, I think of the foundations of reading. You need to have gone through some, training, right? Very specific science of reading training. Your communications and literacy certainly will have some of those skills, but is not going to be quite as in-depth or as rigorous as that foundations of reading assessment. Does that help? Okay.
Cover list.
Yeah, so those are all a reading and writing, and some of them also have a math component, but a reading and writing kind of basic skills type of assessment.
I think we have time, just if you can
Yes.
unpack a little bit of both of those.
Do you have any states that do just a reading and writing component like the VCLA, or is it usually reading, writing, and math?
Massachusetts is just the reading and writing. All of the others that I pulled do have a mathematics component. So yes, let me just pull this up for you here. And again, this is available. We can send you links. Any of the states that currently use foundations of reading, you're going to be able to see here the different sub areas. And let me scroll down here so you can see what those sub areas are. Is that large enough for you? So foundations of reading development, we see the range of objectives, and then right underneath this, we will be able to see those objectives. Development of reading comprehension, reading assessment and instruction, and then your two open response questions down here, again, are going to give them that opportunity to apply their knowledge and provide a response. So here then we have our different sub areas with the objectives and some examples of each of those objectives as well. So yeah, and in the deck that I'm going to share with you, if you'd like to share it with these folks, this site is hyperlinked for you. And yeah, and then also I believe in this foundations of reading piece, yeah, it goes into a little bit, not into detail of the sub areas, but a little bit about the development and how and what it's aligned to. You'd like to see an outline of one of the state tests as well?
The literacy, reading, writing. Sample.
Yeah.
That you presented today.
Yeah. Let me use one of my hyperlinks here. Oh. So when you go to these sites, this is going to give you just kind of an overview of the assessment, the formatting, the time, the breaks, dates, cost, passing standard, right, that they're currently using. If you come down to the bottom, you can see view the tutorials and test preparation for the test. And that's where we can find all of the overview, the test objectives. All of these assessments also have sample questions as well as study guides, that students can download for both the multiple choice as well as the constructed response or open response. And you'll see too that I've learned two states use different language for those types of questions. They may say open response, constructed response, essay questions, but really looking at, in most of these, looking at student artifacts and then giving them an opportunity to think about how they would support those learners. But you can see here, these are the objectives.
And they can get there through the hyperlink.
Yes. Yes. And I know this is a lot to consider. So again, if some alignment work, would be helpful, we could certainly do that. And it may be best to start with this current Massachusetts assessment for which the VCLA was modeled off of or after. And then also, any of the other state assessments that Massachusetts is currently piloting.
And if you need if you need us to make available one of our reading specialists, because something I'm not as a reading specialist. Okay, if you want me to balance some equations out of chemistry test, I'm good. But yeah, but we can give you as much support and let's talk if you need to. Jessica?
Yes, Kelly, you had mentioned Texas, you were going down a path about what Texas was
Oh.
doing. Just want to circle back to.
Yeah, so Texas just developed their own science of reading assessment. They considered the Massachusetts version. But if you work in Texas, you know that Texas wants Texas. And so they developed their own, but it is very similar. Texas has had a huge initiative as well, where they've been, letters training and science of reading training across the state. So it's very much tied to the science of reading research. Texas is not currently sharing that assessment, but that is always something that we could, discuss with them. Most states will say, hey, if we've got something other folks want to use, yeah, let's use them. So we can certainly get you some more information on that one. And I can include it here with the hyperlink so you could look at that as well.
Yeah. We're teachers. We still good. We share good things.
I think the only other state that was considering development is California, but there's nothing, it has not been, the development is not final. And now I think they're kind of looking at some other things that are already available as well. Yeah.
Are there any efforts in place to reduce the cost of testing the students? Because that becomes a huge barrier as well, especially if you have to take something multiple times.
Could you go back and you had the prices of this one? Also?
So one of the things I know that we're supportive of what we're doing is we're giving free retests up to a minimum number of times. And so, something that wouldn't have been done several years ago, but the anti-testing sentiment and we know people need as much support and help as we can. So we're looking at the kind of candidate supports we need to be improving. And so I know that that's certainly a point of conversation, and we've moved in that direction to give free retests. Not in perpetuity, but yeah, so that's one thing I know that we're doing and we're supportive of. And
Is that for VCLA specifically, the retest? Because I've never had a student get a free retest.
Well-
And some of them, literally, I had one student at a previous institution. I think she took it 14 times. She just kept getting, and she's like, I'm going to keep taking this till I pass it on to be a teacher. But it was just one of those things that,
yeah, so Kelly, correct me. I don't think it's been part of the VCLA offering, but certainly can be part of the conversation and considered as you redesign and redevelop that.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question on so let's go these basic skills tests. So for example, the VCLA, what is the basic skill level? Is that college level? Is that high school level? What's the validity of that assessment?
So generally in test development, the state would determine at what level they want that test, at what population you're going to test at, and then through the development process, what those skills and knowledge are necessary in order to do that job. That's figured out in what we call a job analysis.
Mhm.
And so through the job analysis, and that simply what that is asking practitioners in that field, what are the skills and knowledge necessary to do your job? And then wherever those play out, then that's what level that test would be. That would be the specification for that.
You may have the actual records. I think I remember it's high school.
The VCLA sounds.
Yeah. I can't,
You have-
wasn't
we
here
could-
when they did it, so I'm not really sure, but
Right.
that's how it's.
But yeah, we can certainly find out.
There's something interesting here is that we were just talking about that in some endorsement areas. Students have to take 6 different assessments for licensure. And that if we could combine or develop an assessment that overlaps another assessment, this may actually be a wonderful way for us to eliminate one of those tests as long as the measures have to be measured. I know there's a different company thing now, so the what used to be the RBE, the teaching reading, any overlap between the VCLA and that you all are aware of.
I'm not.
PTS did.
Those really are distinct, different. The ones that the elementary people take, they take 2 different tests about actually teaching reading. And it's confusing because the VCLA has reading and writing, but it's not about the teaching of reading and writing. And so it's kind of it's a difficult connection to make.
Yeah.
But we've had some discussions.
Incorporate this, that,
Right.
in VCLA, then essentially we wouldn't.
It's,
Mhm.
it's not at all important what I like. One of the things that I like was the Illinois, they embed reading, the literacy stuff right in their content.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why we brought that to you because, yeah, I mean, the cutting down on the number, cutting down on the cost for candidates. I think that was certainly Illinois' intention. And rather than adding another literacy assessment for everyone, let's just embed it in our content tests. And like I said, they're currently in that process. They have released, several and we can give you, again, access to this information, frameworks, alignments, but this is one all of their secondary science they have completed and redeveloped, and they have those reading competencies built into the content. So there's not a separate or an additional assessment that they have to complete.
I realize we can talk about this more, but later on maybe, because my worry is the future middle and secondary teachers that don't have the preparation on the foundations of reading and, would struggle because I teach a secondary continuity class. I mean, it's much different in not teaching the, the phenomenon or
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true,
Uh-huh.
because those reading in the content area and early literacy development are so different.
Yeah.
And the skills are so different that you really couldn't have one test that would be appropriate for every licensure.
Yeah, what you would do for even teaching reading at those levels is
No.
very different. Yeah.
So you're telling me that at this point, if we wanted to look at something for secondary or K-12, it would be this foundation of reading assessment that you have currently.
That's what we have currently for science of reading. I've made note too, though, to see if there are any other state assessments that might be an option for you.
Asking just make sure I understand what we're.
Yeah.
Presentation.
And so, we can do the, if you see something here that works for you, or you look closer and say, that's great. If it doesn't, and, this is really what we need to put the bill, and it needs to be totally custom developed from the ground up. That's fine too. You see the DCLA work with modifications, that works good. So.
Yes, ma'am.
So you said that the VCLA was up for in 2024.
No, that was theirs. Ours is way out of date.
Ours is way out of date. Okay. And so what goes into redeveloping the tests? Are you looking for just modifying sub areas, or how does that work when you redevelop the tests that you already have?
You care to speak?
Yeah, sure. So it can take a variety of looks, okay? If the redevelopment of the test, if in the redevelopment of the test, it's close enough to what you're looking at, we can modify sub-levels, okay? We can, we can do a, if you will, not a development from the ground up, but we can take that test and we can work with it. It depends if the constructs you're trying to measure are similar enough and there's enough core stuff there that we can use and work with, we will. If you say this is really what we want, right, and there's not enough core material there, we would suggest a redevelopment of that assessment from the ground up. So again, it all depends on, when Dr. Johnson talked to us, one of the things that, and correct me, Dr. Johnson, if I'm wrong, we wanted to see what options were out there, that we're trying to get in front of some of this stuff. And so that's where we are. And so we structured the presentation to be kind of broad and carry your options. And so as you work down into the details, we can, we'll have better answers for you in terms of, but it all starts with what would satisfy your needs more too.
Thank you. I think you've given us quite a bit to think about. Any other questions? And yes, we will have more discussions around our own thoughts in this previous discussions this afternoon as we break into our subcommittee.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, I'll just follow up with you with this deck, with the hyperlinks, and yeah, and please, as you dig into this, don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. If there's any information we can provide you, crosswalks, alignments, we can even provide you, voucher to look at one of the assessments a little more closely as you move forward. Yes, ma'am.
One quick question. I know if an accommodation is needed because you were not a primary English speaking candidate, what kind of documentation requirements need to be submitted for that accommodation?
I'm not sure what.
If you like second language learners,
Yes, yes.
I think you need to verify that English is not your first language. And I don't think there's a deep level of documentation you have.
Not like with your learning disability. That you
Right.
I have a large pool of international student teacher applicants and candidates who really struggle passing this assessment.
I'll follow up and let you know. Exactly.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah,
It's a pleasure being able to talk with you. And thanks to Kelly for doing the bulk of the work.
So one question, so, I'm trying to think past for you. So I was in the States when we went through the development of the VCLA, which was pretty labor intensive and took quite a bit of time. So if in fact, we were able to, can we separate, could we ask for accommodations to be made? Obviously not in another language, because that would, we would have to know for sure the content, but if there could be other accommodations added to the existing VCLA while we got to the place where we were able to do some regeneration. Is that possible?
Yes.
So
Short
we
answer,
could add
yes.
on additional accommodations as the state. As you're saying right now, we don't have any of those.
No, yeah.
Right. So that may be one step. for us. So we could separate that. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you all. Thank you.
We need a break?
Yeah, it's a little break. Maybe, I don't know, 5-10 minutes.
And so I think they gave their emails if you'd like a voucher, if you want to maybe copy down the email, and we will send this out. But again, you may quickly want to get the email and phone number if you're interested in the voucher, or just shoot it in a quick question directly. So that I will not have to be the middle girl on that. Thank you.
Okay.
So you're sharing your screen? Trying to get it up. just for now.
Question for you. I've got 11 general. Is that okay? I mean, it's gonna take me like.
You're always very
I could always. I did, and I've passed it the last couple of meetings, so I'm building drama about this. It's important. Here's important. But anyway. That sounds great. And then, yes, I will. And then. All right, thank you.
Mistakes where I think I'd like to do that. It's never a good idea. But I have a headache.
It's easier to get to the Richmond. Yeah. That's it. Okay. And my wife's parents live in Maine. I'll even be there.
He didn't want to move us.
That was needed. You're right. It's not just. That's similar.
West Virginia. There's always
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, right, everybody.
Meg, do we need to do anything else to get back? We're live, unfortunately.
Yes.
Madam Chair, we have a change in the schedule. We had a request to have the liaison.
Okay, well, we're gonna jump ahead of John now. We'll come back to you, don't you worry. And we're gonna have Dan Lewis is gonna give us a presentation from the Virginia Community College System. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to give you an update on the Educate VA Career Switcher program. And just for quick background, I mean, this program's been in existence since 2004. So the current Educate VA Career Switcher program has 61 candidates enrolled in the spring cohort. These students will complete their licensure requirements on May 20th. The spring ESA New Teacher Academy wraps up on Thursday, February 9th. These students have focused on strategies to support ELLs, English language learners in the area of speaking, listening, writing, and reading. On March 4th, the ESOL Praxis Prep Workshop will begin in Woodbridge to help current teachers prepare for the Praxis subject assessment. And finally, 78 first-year teachers are being supported in their classrooms as the administration team visits each classroom in 32 school districts and a couple private schools. And that sums up my report.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
When you help them prepare for those tests, is that something that is open to others? Because it's something that college universities are always looking at, like how can we better prepare our test students before they get to take the test?
I wish I had the answer to that question, but I can get that for you next time.
Looks like.
Or someone has the answer.
Thank you very much. I actually have been in contact with some partners at Virginia Community College System because they have started that conversation with Chev several months ago about their education courses, and traditionally we've only accepted a few. We're expanding that now. But in my conversation with Nova the other day, when we were looking at their program, they do offer those prep classes and they do offer them for anybody. And so they do BCLA and they do Praxis, the reading one as well. So I know Nova at least does it, and they do offer it online as well.
That's just as you were talking about, I didn't know that. I mean, we need to have a better source for it, not repeating the same efforts across the state. Like if there's something that people are traditionally using and that we can use would be great. Well, thank you. Any questions for Dan?
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move backwards in our agenda to agenda item 1. And we will welcome Jen Altrevor to share with us recommendations to approve new education endorsement programs at institutions of higher education.
Good morning, everyone. I have 2 programs for discussion today. Just a little bit of background information. The regulations governing the review and approval of education programs in Virginia set forth the requirements for the accreditation and approval of programs for preparing teachers, administrators, and other instructional personnel requiring licensure. These regulations establish policies and standards for the preparation of instructional personnel, further ensuring educational quality for Virginia public school students. Colleges and universities are afforded the opportunity to submit new program endorsements every May, by the March 31st of each year. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was excited.
Oh, by no means. That's March 31st. Let me repeat that. March 31st. The Advisory Board of Teacher Education reviews and makes recommendations to the Board of Education on approval of Virginia education programs for school personnel. The final authority for program approval rests with the Board of Education. Requests for all new program endorsements approved by the board receive a ranking of approved, approval stipulations, or approval denied. The following two institutions of higher learning, of higher education have submitted to them new endorsement programs. We have the Rockbridge Consortium, which consists of Washington and Lee, Southern Virginia University, History, Social Science at the undergraduate level. And we have Randolph College, Science Biology at the graduate level. These programs were submitted and our content specialists at the Department of Education reviewed the programs for your approval today.
And I'm assuming since we have individuals, since there's only two programs and we have individuals on ABTEL that are related to each of those programs, that it would be best to approve each of them separately. So we will first ask for a motion to approve the secondary education, history and social science at the undergraduate level for the, I now have lost the name of the consortium. Rockbridge. I was thinking Randolph. Rockbridge Consortium. So do we have a motion to approve or to make that recommendation?
Jessica Jones, so moved.
I'm sorry, second.
Adrian.
And we no longer have to do roll call, right, Maggie? Okay, all right.
But that's with Eric.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would recuse.
Okay, and then next we have the biology, secondary education biology for Randolph College. Do we have a motion to make that recommendation?
Shelby. Oh, go ahead, Ed.
I'll second it.
Okay, Shelby Ellie, a motion to.
And then Andy Cox second. Okay, so our recommend to approve those programs.
Thank you.
Yeah, Peggy's gonna recuse.
Yeah, too.
Okay, and Dr. Johnson, I don't think we have any other specific agenda items, just liaison reports. So do we have a report from the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia for Chef?
No.
Yeah, I have an update. And then Virginia Department of Education, Joan Johnson, you are our next person.
Yes, we always have much to discuss. Much happening at the James Monroe Building. We got several items we want to highlight. I will start with one good note. Great news. You all received a presentation for the teacher apprentice program several weeks ago. We now can officially say that the Department of Labor and Industry has received our application and approved. And so we now have a state registered teacher apprentice model. The Commonwealth. You'll hear more about that. We should be launching several first cycle of implementation grants to incentivize divisions and individuals and universities to collaborate to launch those pilot programs. We're hoping between now and May for those. We've started with the 9 planning grants we offered last year. And so the applications for the implementation grants will be open to any division, but special preference will be given to those 9 that receive the planning grants. So they will be working diligently in response to our solicitation for the implementation grant. So you see there, we've got about 2.5 in ESSER funds. We're leveraging that. And so those will end in 24. But as we know with the apprentice model, it also allows individuals and divisions and the state to be eligible for quite a bit of workforce funding. And then if institutions choose to offer the program through a residency modified residency model, they will be a third pot of money available for candidates and EPPs for the residency money. So again, I'm looking forward to continuing to work with this group on that initiative, but wanted to shout out the staff and those that have been involved with helping to launch that as well. I'm going to pause on the assessments and come back to that, probably talk about that last. Highlight quickly the Board of Education decisions and also ask one of our illustrious board members that's with us today to also chime in. But you can see on the screen, just high level, I kind of went back, I think until since November's meeting, and all of the assessments were approved at the cut scores that you all recommended. And then most recently, we had the recommendation of pretty much first and final review, fast track alignment. It was regarding the procedural guidelines for dismissal. Remember that discussion? So pretty much that went through, and this group, again, we advise that you can make, and the staff would work with you if you wanted to make some other unique requests around the timing and how long, again, we would help facilitate that with you. And then as usual, well, I shouldn't say as usual, but we were able to also receive approval on the consent agenda for the list of qualified persons for school superintendents also. And so I think I would like to ask our board liaison to speak with us about any general thoughts or high level discussions, or just kind of keep us up to date with some of the issues that the board is also working with. And then Maggie, if you do the legislative update after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Is that working? Yeah. There was one item on our agenda this week that I had to ask Joan, how come that didn't come through ABTEL? And she explained to me why it didn't, but we had, so it's not formally within your purview, but informally, if folks have any advice for us, we'd be most welcome. It would be most welcome. We had on our agenda this week for first review, meaning we didn't make a decision about it, but are anticipating a decision on it at our next meeting in March. An application from Arlington County to create a licensure program, a special licensure program for Montessori teachers. The legislature passed a bill 2 or 3, maybe just a couple of years ago now.
2019 now.
Several years ago now, authorizing divisions to apply for a special licensure process, and Arlington is the first one that's done that. And they're saying that they're having a hard time. They've got a number of full-time Montessori schools in Arlington. They're having a hard time staffing them. Welcome to everybody's world. And one of the barriers is that their Montessori teachers have to go through the full Montessori certification process and standard Virginia teaching license. And so they've been working with the Department of Education. The department's appointed a panel to review their application, and came to us this week with Arlington essentially asking that we approve the Montessori certification with very few add-ons, but that they would be willing to accept as a condition that those teachers' licenses would be only for teaching in Montessori schools. And the DOE panel that reviewed the application is recommending that you add on 4 course requirements such that the teachers would be provisionally licensed right away, essentially, but then during the provisional period would have to complete these 4 additional courses. And Joan's going to tell me, or Maggie, if I've got any of this wrong, but we take 4 additional courses that would then essentially qualify them for a regular provisional to full licensure pathway in Virginia. And so when we come back next month, we're going to be having to decide essentially between those 2 options. So one of the questions is, do we really have a mechanism or a way in Virginia to restrict those licenses to teaching in Montessori schools only? So as I say, I asked Joan, how come that didn't come to you all? Because we would have benefited from your wisdom on it. But your statutory authorization is for the traditional licensure methods, not this alternative that it doesn't come to you automatically, but we'd sure appreciate any advice or wisdom, and I can take that, now, Madam Chair, if time permits, but if not, feel free to contact me, email me. Joan can give you my email, and happy to chat between now and our March meeting.
Maybe you wanted to respond a little bit.
I can. The board item up for discussion was on a pathway, not a different license. So the the legislation that Anne referred to was 2486, and it allows for school divisions to have a alternate pathway to licensure. So the end goal is still the exact same license any person in Virginia would get, going through a traditional program, going through an alternate route. But it, again, is an alternate route for that particular district to have their teachers have that unique opportunity to get to the license in a different way. So the panel reviewed the Montessori curriculum and the proposal, and determined that in order for them to get to the license that everybody else holds in Virginia, that in addition to the Montessori credential and the praxis assessment, they have to take 4 additional courses. And if you're familiar with elementary endorsements, as those 3 methods classes, and then we added on a reading and writing to address the Virginia Literacy Act that's coming to the board. That was what the panel's recommendation was. The board discussed whether or not they could restrict or put conditions on that license. Joan and I had not yet had time to debrief from the board meeting last week, but any type of license that the board decides, if they do decide to go with, will come through ABTEL. So the reason that this didn't go through ABTEL was because this is a specific alternate route that goes to the board for approval. But any license, any regulatory action where we're adding licenses, where we're restricting licenses, or we're restricting endorsements, that type of thing, that's going to be open up to the regs, which is something that we come through ABTEL first before going to the board for discussion.
Or one of the board members recommended that if there are other options that would already exist that would allow some flexibility without having to go through the regs. I don't remember which board
We haven't had a
asked that,
chance to.
but yes, one of the board members is with us today, asked that question actually. So yeah.
And just briefly on other business, we did approve the administration's recommended history and civics standards on a 5-3 vote. So they now go out for public comment across the Commonwealth on hearing dates that have been announced in March, and will come back before us for final review in April. We also heard an initial presentation from the department on proposed changes to accreditation and accountability. And the main takeaway on that is stay tuned. We're going to be hearing a lot more about some proposed short-term quick changes in how the accreditation system works. Changes that the administration suggests we can make without going through regulatory or statutory changes that they're hoping will put into place for next year, for the next accountability year. And then they're proposing other changes that will likely require regulatory and or statutory action that wouldn't go into effect until the following year. And the details of those we'll learn more about in March.
Any feedback for her on any of those updates?
Only question is there a timeline? Is there anything that we need to do immediately or feedback on the Montessori? Anything that's immediate?
The Montessori matter will come back before us for final review at our March meeting. So if informally you have any input on it at time on that, is sooner rather than later.
And I have one thought about Montessori program is, if they're able, or you all are able to like restrict it to this is an endorsement that is only going to license someone for Montessori, we could see a proliferation of Montessori schools, but who decides whether that's Montessori or not? You are like if there's no system in place for a school, a public school would say, well, we're a Montessori school now because we're going to adopt some Montessori principles. Would that then open this up for you know, those teachers well. I don't know. I'm just imagining.
Well, other organizations, right?
The Montessori folks themselves have some kind of certification process for
Yeah,
teachers. I
that
don't
might
know
be,
what they do for schools.
that might be a consideration if the school itself is accredited as a Montessori school in their organization, then that might be some official stamp that, you know, yeah.
And actually, that raises another, I think we're told that while this is the first application that's coming through the process, we're anticipating that there are others either already in the pipeline or, and something from something called I Teach.
Correct.
And that's partnering with a number of divisions on an alternative licensing. And even though it's not formally in you all's purview, you all have so much expertise to offer us on that. And so, Madam Chair, I leave it to your discretion whether there's a way for this body to look at those topics and give us your wisdom on it, however you may choose to. But prospectively, the I Teach one is not so whatever it hasn't come to us at the board at any level yet. So there may be time for you all to figure out how to weigh in if there's an opportunity.
Jen, what is your feedback on that? Like, is it just like a personal reach out to say Ann or to other board members to share information? Because even though we're on ABTEL, but we're not supposed to be making recommendations. So, yeah.
So you could put something in writing, and they could represent ABTEL, or it's regular feedback that we can present. We believe that there will be another work session. That was one of the recommendations, that this item come back to the board as a work session, and potentially have someone there from the Montessori school themselves. So we could provide your feedback at that time.
That would be at the March meeting. So for the Montessori application, I would suggest just informal, but if you want to look more, if you want to look into the issue of this I Teach one, you all may want to, Nancy, you may want to confer with Donor Maggie and figure out if there's a way you all can spend some time on it at a future meeting and give us some timely wisdom on it.
And if we have time today during our subcommittee meetings, the licensure committee can consider feedback about the Montessori thing.
Right.
And you know, if that's more time.
Great, thanks.
Is the question that we're wanting to restrict people seeking that special alternative licensure to only work in Montessori schools? Because the people coming through other alternative licensure programs, let's say a vocational ed, a career switcher, or something like that, that have an alternative kind of certification, are we restricting them to only work in a
So
certain?
this is a special bill, and that's one of the reasons why it didn't come before you all. It's a bill, it's legislation that basically says if a division and any other agency, I can't remember the wording exactly, wishes to pursue this ultimate route, they can and meet certain conditions. And so this division is following that. But we have several other routes that are unique in the licensure regs that allow people to come in those different ways, but this is just one way. And so that's the initial decision. But at this point, the board wants more information about options, not just whether this particular program is approved, but are there some other things that we can do, potentially do restrict, but not necessarily, but are some other options.
And I would say to your question, this pathway is restricted to Arlington. So if I'm a Newport News teacher and I have my Montessori credential, I wouldn't be able to use this pathway to get a Virginia teaching license that has, you know, the PGP with the elementary ed endorsement on it. Using my teacher voice does not work all the time. I would only be able to go through this route through Arlington. No other school division would be able to offer this. So Arlington is actually the only one that has Montessori schools and provides that instruction, that methodology for their kiddos. I think they have 7 schools.
They're considered public. They're a public school.
But ultimately, they're going to receive the collegiate profession, or the goal is.
So with this, for 2486, the goal and what the panel was reviewing for was, does this proposal satisfy all the competencies of an approved program so that anybody coming through this particular pathway, doesn't matter if they come into Arlington and then they go to Newport News 3 years later, what they get at the end of the program would be a CP PGP license with an elementary or middle school endorsement on it. And then like I said, the panel decided that the credential itself was not exclusively enough to satisfy all the competencies, and that's why they added on the additional coursework.
But then the board is
And then-
considering whether that's acceptable or they can do something totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I think if there are no more questions or comments for our board liaisons, you might as well take the mic and go with the licensure legislation updates.
I'm just gonna.
Has everybody had a chance to sign in while Maggie's transitioning? I've got the sign-in sheet here.
All right. It has been a busy session already. Last time I did not have an opportunity. I mean, we were just starting out. They were still filing bills. We are halfway through. It is officially crossover week, so that's good. We're halfway through. The agency is probably monitoring almost 200 bills, which is not as many as last year, but it seems like the topics are much bigger this year than they were last year. And we're definitely seeing it fall on party lines in both houses. So we've got quite a few bills that had companion bills to them. And so we've got one on national teacher certification incentive reward program that upped the amount of money for those that were credentialed, and also allowed them to, for people pursuing that certification to also get reimbursed. Delegate Coiner's bill was laid on the table, but the Senate bill is still alive, but it's crossover week, so we'll see how that goes. We had a few where teachers, and this comes up every year, teachers required to be compensated at or above national average. That was laid on the table in the House. Delegate von Valkenburg, he had one. Shelby, you had asked about this, about waivers for the sub waivers. This is for folks who, school divisions right now, if you have a long-term sub who is serving longer than 90 days in a vacancy for a teacher of record, the school division has to send a letter of request and approval to the state superintendent for that person to continue in that slot. Van Valkenburg's bill was going to waive that for the 23-24 and 24-25 school year. This is very similar to what we had during COVID. That was also laid on the table. The Virginia Teaching Residency Training Corps was laid on the table for a second year in a row. Things that we still have alive. Nope, let me actually, two right here. These House bills were both laid on the table, but there are Senate companion bills, and they are focused on our English language learners. So there's a grant program and fund established for those who are looking to get that endorsement, and also an incentive reward for those that have the endorsement. But the House bills were laid on the table, but the Senate bills are still alive. For our HR folks, there was a bill related to the retirement system. For those of you that aren't familiar, if a teacher retires, in order for them to come back, they have to either be in a critical shortage area or they have to have a break in service for so many months. They were trying to reduce the amount of months from 12 to 6. The House bill was laid on the table, but there is a companion Senate bill. And so we'll see what happens with that. Let's see. Teach for Virginia Loan Repayment Assistance Fund and Program. The House version of that was laid on the table. You'll notice that the ones that had money attached to them were mostly laid on the table in the House. Let's see. We do have the one that I had mentioned in ABTEL last month, and thanks to Shelby and the NOVA delegation, we were trying to have provisionally licensed teachers who had an expired license who wanted to come back into the profession. In the code, the criteria says that you have to have satisfactory performance evaluation for every year of the provisional license. And we have folks who leave the profession. We have folks who, for, family circumstances, whatever it may be, they don't finish out the 3 years of their provisional. So they don't have those 3 years of satisfactory performance evaluation. Thanks to Shelby and the Nova delegation, we actually had 3 different folks chime in, and we have seen some movement there. It's been both the House and the Senate have approved their sides of the bill, allowing for the change in the language to say for each year employed. So if you're not employed all 3 years, as long as you're employed for 1, then, and so that'll affect right now. I think I shared with you that there are 40,000 inactive provisional licenses in our database. So not saying all 40,000 will come back, but it might help a little bit. I know Shelby had mentioned that that's one of the biggest things on her side of getting folks back in, is that they weren't eligible because of that performance evaluation. We do have a bill, Senate Bill 935, that does not have a companion, but it's making its way through, about the development of a teacher licensure website and licensure application portal, which is what we're already doing. So that was a good one. And it just gave us a reason to ask for more money. So that was nice. So that was really good. We also have Senate Bill 1041, which doesn't have a companion, but it is also making its way through. And this has to do with division superintendents and their qualifications. If anybody remembers, we had a couple of we call them option 4 superintendent candidates come through this past fall, and there was some controversy. And so this cleans up the language for the superintendent license qualifications. And then one of the ones that actually, this is the one that Shelby's delegation kind of Christmas treed, was actually one that dealt with teacher education and licensure ABTEL. And it is changing your responsibilities to add teacher recruitment and retention to your focus. So in addition to all of the other things that you guys do, you are also going to add to that workload of teacher recruitment and retention. So my guess is, as this moves through, and like I said, this one doesn't have a companion either, but as it moves through and is approved, we'll likely have Meg Homer, our engagement specialist, here next year and more often to give updates and to provide feedback on our efforts there. Oh, of course not. No, still moving. No money attached to it. No money attached to it. And then the very last one is actually a joint resolution for teacher licensure. And this is for JLARC to do a study. Well, actually, it says DOE to study, but no money is attached to it. A feasibility of expanding waivers for certain positions. And so the bill originally had positions related to STEM and STEAM, computer science positions. It's passed the Senate. We'll see what happens when it comes across the aisle, or see what happens. In addition to the original budget that was introduced by the governor, we did get a few budget amendments that were announced over the weekend. But some of these were contingent on whether or not the legislation passed, obviously. So the $14.4 million for the English language learners grant, that Senate bill wasn't, that probably won't come through. So we won't have that money. And then the teacher residency program, I think, is the only money that stayed in at $3 million. So congrats, that's good. And right now we do have signing bonuses in high turnover divisions at 2.2 million. That's not tied to legislation. So we'll see what happens there. And if I'm not mistaken, both the Senate and the House asked for, in addition to the 5% salary increases that teachers were going to have July 1 of this year, they've added a 2% bonus on top of that. So we'll see if that sticks in after the money committees meet and come through. So that's all I have. Yes, absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah, the budget in the respective House and Senate budgets just came out yesterday afternoon, and so everybody's still reading about them. I haven't read the things themselves, but the commentary I read suggests that both do, as Maggie said, give a 2% on top of the 5% for teachers and other public employees starting July 1. The Senate budget that's for the state share of those raises. So localities obviously will still have to come up with their share. The Senate version has an additional 588 million in direct aid and 270 million to fully lift the support cap that was imposed back in 2010. So basically more money, significantly more money through the SOQs, so that localities could then use to help hopefully pay their share of the raises if need be. So that's a real difference that will have to be resolved. Both houses have the 2% teacher raise state funds, state share, but the Senate has significantly more K-12 money overall. It's 600, almost $1 billion, and that will have to be resolved in conference between now and the end of the session. Did I get that right?
You did. And actually, just to also mention, both budgets also have language that do not hold harmless the divisions for the $201 million shortfall that folks probably read about in the paper. And so both budgets take that into consideration. And so I think that's probably something else that we'll be talking a lot about in budget conference about where that money is going to come from and what that's going to look like.
Thank you. My last, update is really, I guess, the beginning of the discussion around the assessments. And so we know we have our subcommittees that work with licensure and teacher prep. And in the last meeting, the two groups came together and really kind of talked a little bit about potentially strategies for moving forward. So I wanted everyone to be aware of that as we think about planning. So again, as a reminder, we have March and April meetings that remain also. So we've got 2 meetings if there are other items that we want to bring forward. I guess high level is, I think the group has come to some sort of consensus around elementary as a place to begin. 1, we know critical shortage area. 2, we know that particular endorsement has the most requirements for assessments. And we hear constantly the cost, right, and potentially duplication of the assessments. So that licensure committee was charged with looking at the assessments for BCLA and the new Praxis Elementary and reading Praxis 2 assessments. So again, I think the committee would like for this group to consider potentially looking at what is currently required for elementary for the Praxis 2, which has the 4 sections. In addition, they are also required to do what now we call the Praxis teaching reading. So that replaces the VRA. Remember those of us that are from that era. And then there is the VCLA that they also are required to take. So again, in summary of, I guess, a thought for your, feedback today is consideration of, as we heard today, continuing to look at the requirements for the VCLA, and then knowing that we need to make some decisions about content, whether this group would consider removing that VCLA piece from the elementary requirements, given that they're already taking multiple assessments that actually are at a much higher level in terms of reading, but it does not contain the writing. That's a reminder for myself. That's the only thing that is not really emphasized with the 4 areas for the elementary, plus the teaching of reading component. So I guess, again, first challenge is 1, thinking through VCLA as a body and what we heard today from Pearson, and then considering the recommendation of the subcommittee to remove the VCLA requirement for elementary only at this time, and then having them take all those other assessments. Would anyone else want to add anything from the committee?
When we looked at that, though, we
kind of decided, I mean, BCLA, the way it is structured, does not really match with what the elementary ed take for their content area. What we were looking at is the duplication between the teaching reading and the subtest for reading, not the VCLA, because VCLA is really a completely different animal from those two, but those two do duplicate each other. The praxis subtest and the reading. And so that was what we were looking at, and I don't know that that would be beneficial, but I mean, the new teaching reading test is, from our analysis, much more complex than the subtest on the practice. And I see you shaking.
So, no, okay, so the RDE is the one that's on the pedagogy, right? The teaching piece.
It's actually no longer, it's teaching reading.
The teaching reading, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure that we stay right.
So the teaching reading is very, very much that, right? The pedagogy. The subtest on the reading content, that's the one that's more aligned to the VCLA piece, because it's
Actually,
really,
it's fine. None of those tests really align to VCLA, because VCLA is like taking, it's like basic reading and writing competencies. It's not about the teaching of reading or language arts.
right,
And
but
so,
that's what I'm saying, that content elementary reading is also not about the teaching, it's about knowledge
It's
of
like
reading.
this.
History and the science of the four components.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, no, I analyzed a lot of that last
Yes,
year
yes.
in doing that. I still do think there's overlap, but I want to make sure that sorry. I do believe there is overlap, and I'm all for making this a more streamlined, process of assessments for elementary. But I want to make sure we are on the right thing. So I mean, I'm hearing you, Joe, that there's 2 more meetings and we do want to take some action. So I think we decide on our committees to recommend, bring it to the broader body here next meeting with some, refinement and discussion around it so we can get it moving forward. I mean, so we can continue to talk Nancy about it, but I just want to make sure we are listening. Right.
And the discussion about the VCLA. We also need to have some thoughts, consideration, discussion around the VCLA as a standalone. Right. Do we pursue the regeneration with potential, some of the things that we learned today? Love the accommodations for sure that we were not aware of before, especially if they could create a bilingual version. Yeah. And again, remembering that we will have ETS here in March. So.
And what I thank you for mentioning that. So I'll come up to this mic right here. ETS will be here next month to talk about their assessments. And I was talking to Malik. He's our ETS person that we all know and love. And he had mentioned, because we were talking about the overlap in those tests, that there are states that take out that subtest for language arts and just use the reading. And so we've got lots of options there. So he's going to talk a little bit about that when he's here too. So he'll be here. Stay tuned for next March.
So any thoughts from the board as we talk about this? And if you have any thoughts that you think we should keep in mind as we anticipate bringing forward a recommendation to make some changes. Any thoughts to help us as we maneuver that process?
You all have so much more expertise on this than me, so, but I would just say, I mean, obviously, the big picture thing happening is the Literacy Act. And so we're going, and ideally, hopefully, higher ed course requirements and our assessment requirements are all going to be aligned with the new curriculum coming down. So I would be careful of doing anything that could be incompatible with that. But to me, what I was hearing earlier is that Foundations of Reading course sounds more comparable to our elementary reading assessment rather than to VCLA. Right. But the notion that VCLA maybe overlaps and would be unnecessary for the teachers who are passing that elementary reading, that sure seems like something worth exploring. But I'm way beyond my knowledge here. But make sure we stay straight on the whatever you do is compatible with the requirements of the Literacy Act. And then absolutely, to the extent you can do things that make it easy, that help us attract and retain more teachers and remove barriers. The BCLA is certainly a barrier. Whether or not we can go completely assessment free, it is probably not. We probably can't. We've heard some of the research suggests might be a reason to do that, but the statutory requirement probably stops us from that. So I wouldn't hold my breath for the statute to be changed. No.
Anything else? Go to the order. Anything else for the go to the order on that? Yes.
So, as a elementary person, trying to represent the elementary educators, I've talked to people who are pursuing their degree or their certification, and they are just overwhelmed with the amount of tests. When I entered, I obviously didn't have to take that amount of tests. I had less, but they are seeing that it is a lot of test taking, and it kind of hinders them from thinking about, well, do I really want to enter this? Do I really want to become a Virginia certified teacher? So I see both sides, obviously, being here and also as an educator, but that is something we really need to dive into and think about as attracting teachers to enter, as we are noticing the decline of people entering. So just want to put my thoughts in there.
And even when I talk to students about it, we're interested in education, you talk to elementary versus secondary. Like secondary have one test in BCLA, and then elementary, you're like, we've got this one test, but it's really 4 subtests, and you have the BCLA, their eyes glass over. I mean, it's a lot to eat. Like if you're thinking about going into the profession, it can be daunting to think that I had to go out and take this many tests. Like, and you can take all the subtests at one time, but that's a lot to take English, language, or language arts, math, science, and social studies all in one day. So it's definitely something we need to look at.
And on the reverse, as we're talking about the BCLA Act and implementation, that's also one of the challenges for faculty, right? That they must prepare them, the elementary group, with so many different content areas, and now adding on another layer related to the BCLA. No, I'm sorry, the VLA, and how to have time to address all of that, to have successful candidates when they get to these assessments.
Well, and then we always go back to the idea that if they don't pass the test and we dismiss them from our programs and they get hired, they don't have to pass them at all, as long as they have good value. I mean, it's really kind of a backwards thing. I've said it before, I'm gonna get back up on my soapbox, but it's really an issue that teachers can leave our programs, that we can say, I'm sorry, because we have gateways. Even one of those tests was named Gateway. Like, we have places where if you're not making progress, you literally are dismissed from our programs, even if you've been phenomenal. As a student teacher, as an intern, if you've done a great job, we have to let you go because it can cost us. But then you can leave, get hired provisionally, never pass those tests, BCLA, any of those, just take them as long as you've attempted them and have a superintendent recommend a license for you. It's penalizing the education programs, even if we know somebody, like if we evaluate, we say, you were really making great progress. My one student who took the BCLA 14 times is a fabulous teacher. She's a principal now. She just struggled with one component of the test over and over and over again. And we tried to kind of counsel her out of it. And I think it became almost a mental struggle. It really did. She's like, no, Dr. Bradley. She's like, I'm going to be a teacher and I will pass this test. And she did. But thankfully she had the family support to take it that many times. But we see that all the time. Second language learners are an example of students who start into a program and can't finish it based on not on their ability to complete our program, not on their ability to know science, biology, chemistry, physics, whatever it is, but on a test that really stops their progression. And it's something we really need to look at leveling that field for our candidates as well as those that are hired provisionally. With that, do you want us to go ahead? It's only 11:03, so should we go ahead and take a break and move into committees and then we'll do lunch? Is that a good plan?
I make the motion to adjourn the meeting.
And then finally second.
Okay, and with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. I have the travel documents And then again, as we, a reminder, lunch will be served at like 11:15, 11:30, and so we get the food and bring it back to this room for our committee meetings. But we can start the committee meetings earlier today. And I want to stop this, let me stop recording, and end the meeting. Kevin?